The moment I saw the new metal gate welded across my private campground entrance, I thought it was a prank. But when I spotted the smug HOA security sign and a group of polished-shirted board members waving papers like they owned the place, I knew this wasn't a joke. What they didn't know, they'd just blocked access to land they didn't own, and I held the deed to every inch of dirt surrounding their fancy lakeside resort. The sun had just started peeking through the trees. As I drove down the familiar gravel road to my campground, the early morning mist floated above the ground, and birds chirped in the branches overhead. I always loved this time of day, quiet, peaceful, and untouched. This land was my escape, my dream. I bought it 3 years ago after saving up for nearly a decade, over 600 acres of forest, trails, and a stretch of private lakefront pine. Hollow Camp. I turned it into a small but popular retreat for weekend campers and families who wanted to get away from the city noise. It had everything: fishing spots, hiking paths, even a few cozy cabins. I knew every tree, every turn in the road, or at least, I thought I did. That morning, as I turned the last bend before my entrance, I hit the brakes hard. Right in front of me stood a brand new metal gate, silver and shiny, stretching across the road like a prison barrier. On either side were tall posts planted deep into the gravel, clearly welded in place, not temporary. And hanging from the center of the gate was a red sign that read, "Private property, HOA, residents only, no trespassing." I stared at it, confused. What in the world was this? My campground road had never been gated. It was on private land, my land. I got out of my truck, slammed the door, and walked up to the gate. That's when two men stepped out of a white pickup parked behind the trees. They wore black polo shirts with HOA security stitched in white on the chest. One held a clipboard, and the other just stood there, arms crossed, like he was ready to stop a riot. "Morning," I said, trying to stay calm. "Is there a reason this gate is here?" The guy with the clipboard walked up to me, barely glancing at my face before flipping a few papers. "This road now falls under Lakewood Heights HOA control," he said flatly. "Residents only beyond." This point I blinked. What? That's not possible. This road leads to my campground. You can't just block it. He didn't look surprised. He must have known this was coming. As of last week, the HOA voted to install a gate due to excessive noise and unauthorized traffic. You'll need to take this up with the board. In the meantime, you'll need to turn around. My blood started to boil. I wasn't some trespasser. I owned this land. And this road, which had been carved out decades ago by the original landowners, was entirely inside my property lines. But these guys acted like I was the one causing trouble. I reached for my phone and pulled up a photo of my property survey. "This entire road from that turn back there all the way to the lake is mine," I said, pointing at the screen. "See this line? That's the property boundary. You're standing on my land." The man sighed and handed me a folded letter from his clipboard. "If you have an issue, contact the HOA legal team. This is your official notice." I opened the letter. It was a suspicion list accusing me of violating community standards by hosting non-resident events and disrupting the peace. It said the road was now subject to emergency regulation under HOA authority. The legal jargon made my head spin. I stepped back and looked at the gate again. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. Someone in that HOA had decided I was a problem, and instead of talking to me, they took it upon themselves to fence me out of my own land. They thought I'd just back off, that I'd roll over and accept it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I drove back home that afternoon in silence. My phone buzzed with texts from campers trying to check in, saying they were being turned away at the gate. Some thought it was a prank, others were angry. A few families were already halfway through their weekend bookings, stranded outside, while the so-called security guards refused to let them through. I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out my deed, my permits, and every piece of documentation I had. My lawyer, Paul, picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're calling for something normal," he said with a laugh. "Please say it's about the fishing permit again." "Not even close," I said, and told him everything. There was a pause then. "Wait, they blocked your road, locked it, put up a steel gate, and God said it's HOA property now." Paul let out a long whistle. "That's not just dumb, that's illegal. And if your survey's right, they just trespassed and interfered with your business. Let's go after them." I agreed. But before we jumped into legal action, I needed to be absolutely sure. I drove straight to the county records office the next morning and got every land survey, map, and zoning document I could find. I sat with the county clerk, a woman named Linda who remembered me from when I first bought the land. "Looks like everything's still in your name," she said, scrolling through the records. "They've submitted a complaint about road use, but nothing's been approved. And that road," she tapped the map, "still yours." I left with a thick folder of documents and a new fire in my chest. They thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be scared of some board members with clipboards and empty threats, but they had just messed with the wrong landowner. Back at the property, I parked just outside the gate and looked over the trees beyond. Behind that barrier sat a wealthy little resort community, Lakewood Heights, full of people who had no idea that every peaceful trail, every dock view, and every road leading out of their gates was completely surrounded by land I owned, and I was about to remind them. After the weekend disaster, I spent the next few days gathering every document I could find. I wanted proof, solid, undeniable proof that this land was mine and that the road they blocked had always been part of it. My lawyer, Paul, was already prepping a formal notice of trespass, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. The HOA clearly thought they had some kind of power, maybe, because they were used to scaring their own residents with petty rules and fines. But I wasn't part of their little world. I didn't live behind their gates, and I didn't answer to their board. They had no idea that their entire neighborhood was surrounded by something they didn't control. One afternoon, Paul met me back at the property, where we walked the entire stretch of the gated road. He had a survey map in one hand and a GPS marker in the other. Every few steps he'd stop, scan the area, and jot down notes. "You were right," he said, crouching by a boundary marker hidden under some brush. "This road isn't just partly on your land, it's completely inside your property line." We kept walking past the gate, deeper toward the lake, until we reached a fork in the trail that split off toward the back entrance of Lakewood Heights. It was a quiet path, narrow, lined with pine trees and fallen leaves. But according to the maps, it was also mine. "They built their back trail right through here," Paul said, shaking his head. "And look at this, their scenic overlook. It's about 30 feet into your land. And don't even get me started on that dock they built by the lake." I stared at the sparkling water in the distance, then turned to the neat row of vacation homes up the hill. Lakewood Heights looked polished, peaceful, like a picture from a brochure. But behind those trimmed hedges and clean driveways was a problem they hadn't seen coming. Because while they'd been busy enforcing HOA rules and patrolling their perfect little neighborhood, they'd never stopped to check who owned the land around them. Now, their entire resort was basically sitting in a box and I owned the lid. Over the next few days, I hired a private survey crew to confirm everything. They came out with stakes, flags, and high-precision tools. For 3 days, they worked along the property line, marking every border with bright orange tape. By the time they were done, the results were crystal clear. Lakewood Heights was landlocked, their main road in and out cut across my land. Their emergency exit passed through my trees. Their private docks sat half on my shoreline, and their nature trails, every one of them strayed into my woods. Once the surveyor handed me the full report, I made my next move. I printed large signs and posted them at every entry point. "Warning, you are now entering private property. Access by permission only. Violators will be prosecuted." I didn't use chains or locks, not yet. I wanted to give them a chance to respond like adults, but I knew it wouldn't take long before they noticed I was right. The first call came from a woman named Susan, the HOA board president. She sounded calm at first, polite even. "Hi there. I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We noticed some signs around the property that are, well, a bit concerning." "No misunderstanding," I said flatly. "Your HOA installed a gate on my land. You blocked access to my campground and interfered with my business. I've since confirmed your community is surrounded by my property, including the roads, trails, and the shoreline. So if anyone should be concerned, it's not you, it's me." There was a long pause on the line. Then she cleared her throat and said, "Surely we can discuss this in a civilized way. There's no need for threats." "Then take the gate down," I said, "or I'll file a court order." She didn't respond right away. Finally, she said, "Let me talk to the board and get back to you." I didn't wait. That same day, Paul and I submitted a cease and desist to the HOA's legal office. Along with it, we included the full survey report, a demand to remove the unauthorized gate, and a request for damages due to lost campground revenue. I also notified the sheriff's office so they were aware of the situation in case things escalated by the end of the week. The signs were working. Residents started asking questions. A few even drove down the trail to my campground to ask what was going on. I explained it all, calmly and clearly. Most of them looked shocked. Some were downright angry. "They never told us any of this," one man said, shaking his head. "They just voted for the gate and said it was for security. No one said it was on someone else's land." Another woman asked, "Wait, so the lake trail I walk every morning, that's not part of the HOA?" "Nope," I said. "It's part of Pine Hollow, my land." Word spread fast. By the next board meeting, tensions were high. I heard from one of the residents, a kind older man named Jerry, who used to bring me homemade jam, that the meeting turned into a shouting match. People wanted answers. Why had the board overstepped? Why had they risked the community's access to the lake, the trails, the road, all without checking the facts? The board tried to save face. They claimed they were looking into options and had acted in good faith. But no one was buying it. I had the deed, the survey, the legal claim, and now I had the attention of everyone inside Lakewood Heights. Paul laughed when he heard about the meeting. "They built their kingdom on your island," he said. "Now they're realizing you control the only bridges." I smiled, but I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. All I wanted was respect. And if they couldn't give it willingly, I had no problem forcing them to sit down and listen, because the truth was, I didn't need them, but they absolutely needed me. By the end of that week, The pressure was mounting, not on me, but on the HOA. My signs were now posted on every single entry point around Lakewood Heights. Bright, bold, and legally worded. They made it clear, this land is privately owned. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The residents were confused and upset. The board members were scrambling. I could almost feel the panic coming from their perfectly trimmed neighborhood. They had thought they were in charge. They were used to running things, making rules, sending fines, but now they were surrounded by something they couldn't control. My land. The funny part. I didn't even need to do much. I just let the truth do the work. Word spread through the community like wildfire. Families started canceling their moving-in plans. Real estate agents were furious. They called me asking for clarification, asking if I was really going to block trail access or charge the HOA to use the roads. I gave them all the same honest answer, yes and yes. Of course, they didn't like that. But I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't even being greedy. I had built Pine Hollow Camp with care, legally and quietly. I never asked for trouble. But the moment that steel gate went up across my road, they turned it into a war. One morning I drove back out to check on the gate. Still locked, still guarded. 2 new security guys stood near it now. Younger this time, clearly hired in a hurry. One of them recognized me and looked a little uncomfortable. "Sir, we were told not to let anyone through this entrance unless they're HOA," he said, holding up a laminated rule sheet. "Interesting," I replied, "because I was told that standing on someone else's property without permission is trespassing." His eyes darted. I just work here, I know," I said calmly. "But tell your boss that gate's coming down one way or another." Then, I handed him a new letter, this one from Paul, our formal demand. The deadline to remove the gate was in 3 days. If they failed, we'd file a lawsuit for trespassing, obstruction of business, and damages, not to mention seek an emergency injunction that could shut down all HOA-owned roads that touched my land. That part always got their attention because Lakewood Heights had no exit that didn't cross through me. That night, I sat on my porch, with a warm cup of coffee, staring at the map I'd pinned to the wall. All the orange flags marked HOA points that were directly on my land or needed my land to function. The list was longer than even I expected. Their walking trails, their scenic overlook, their emergency service road, the dock, the private boat ramp, even a corner of their fancy clubhouse parking lot was technically over the boundary. I had them boxed in, but still I didn't want to be unreasonable, so I did something they hadn't. I offered a choice. I drafted a land use proposal. It offered the HOA 3 clear options: pay a yearly land lease to use the roads, trails, and lake access. It wouldn't be cheap, but it would be fair. Remove all structures, paths, and docks that sat on my land and use only what belonged to them. Fight it in court and risk losing access altogether. I emailed the proposal directly to Susan, the board president, with a polite note. "You may not like the choices, but at least I'm giving you some." The next day she called. Her voice had changed. "No more fake sweetness. No more calm professionalism. This is extortion," she snapped. "You're trying to bleed a community dry." "No," I replied, just as calm. "I'm trying to fix a mess your board created. I didn't weld a gate across someone else's road. I didn't block access to illegal business. I didn't pretend I owned land. I didn't. You did all that. I'm just responding." There was silence on her end. Then a short, bitter laugh. "You know the residents won't agree to this. They'll vote it down. Then I suggest you start teaching them how to kayak out of the neighborhood," I said, and hung up. 2 days later I received a message from Jerry, the old man who once brought me jam. He wasn't on the board, but he still cared about the community. He asked if I'd be willing to speak at a special town hall meeting. Not a legal showdown, just a conversation. A way for residents to hear the full story, directly from me. I agreed. That Friday night, I stood in front of 50-some residents in their clubhouse, the same building that, ironically, partially sat on my land. Most of them looked stressed, tired, frustrated. Some looked angry. But I wasn't there to fight. I brought a simple printed map, my original deed, the survey report, and a photo of the gate they put up. I started with the facts. I didn't come here to make enemies. I told them, I came here to run a peaceful campground on the land. I worked hard to buy. I never caused trouble. I never broke rules. But your HOA made the mistake of fencing me out of what I legally own. They crossed the line, literally and legally. Murmurs filled the room. "I'm not shutting your community down. I'm not throwing anyone out. But if you want to keep using land that doesn't belong to you, then like everyone else in the world you need to pay for it, or stop using it." One woman stood up. "Why didn't they tell us about any of this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe they thought I'd roll over. Maybe they didn't think I'd fight back." Jerry stood up beside her. "But you're giving us a choice." "Yes," I said. 3, actually. "You can pay, you can remove what's on my land, or you can take your chances in court. But the gate comes down either way." By the end of the night, people clapped. Not because they were happy, but because they respected the truth. I had laid it out plainly. And now, it was their turn to act. The trap had been set long ago, not by me, but by their own arrogance. I just happened to be the one holding the key, and they were finally starting to realize it. The town hall meeting had shaken things up in a big way. I could feel the shift the moment I drove back to the property the next morning. The air wasn't tense anymore, it was uncertain. The smugness from the HOA guards was gone. The steel gate still stood, but the security guys barely glanced at me as I parked nearby. I could tell they were just doing a job, no longer defending a cause. They were pawns in a game that had grown far beyond community safety. Inside Lakewood Heights, things were boiling over. Residents were divided. Half of them were furious at the board for acting without consent, while the other half were just scared of what would happen if I followed through, and I could hardly blame them. Their neighborhood was never meant to be an island, but thanks to the board's poor decisions, it was now boxed in from every angle. Their access roads, their trails, their lakefront, all tied to me. That weekend I received a call from someone new. Her name was Dana, and she introduced herself as the interim board president. Apparently Susan and 2 other members had resigned after the town hall fallout. "Look," Dana said, "I know you're angry, you've got every right to be, but the residents have had enough chaos. Can we sit down, just the 2 of us, and find a middle ground?" I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between town and the lake. No lawyers, no drama, just coffee and a table between us. "I'm not here to argue," she said as she slid into the booth. "And I'm not going to insult you by pretending. We weren't wrong. What the last board did, it was reckless." I nodded. "It was more than reckless. It was illegal." "You're right, and we're not denying it. I've looked over your documents, the survey, the deed, the legal filings. It all checks out. You own the land. We messed up." She paused, then looked me straight in the eye. "But please understand something. There are families in that neighborhood, kids, elderly couples, people who just want to live in peace. And now they feel like the walls are closing in. We need a solution that works for everyone, and fast." I sipped my coffee and set it down. "That's why I gave you options. I didn't just slam the gates and walk away. I gave you 3 clear paths." She nodded. "And the board is leaning toward the lease option. But we need time. Residents want more clarity. They want to know what it includes, what it costs, how long it lasts." "Fine," I said. "I'll give you time." 1 week after that, the lease price goes up. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're raising the price." "No," I said. "I'm keeping it fair. But if I wait too long, I start losing income from my campground. That loss needs to be covered somehow. So, yes, delay has a cost." Dana didn't argue. She understood. And unlike the old board, she didn't try to push blame onto me. By Monday, things moved quickly. Dana sent over a formal request for a 10-year lease agreement, renewable, with access to the trails, shoreline, and main entry road. They agreed to pay annual rent and maintenance fees, as well as legal costs for the mess the previous board had created. I forwarded everything to Paul, who cleaned up the language and got it ready for signature. But just when it seemed like the storm was settling, a new problem appeared. Susan came back. Apparently, even though she'd resigned from the board, she was still a very vocal member of the community, and she didn't like the idea of giving in to me, the man who, in her words, threatened our peaceful neighborhood with a financial gun to the head. She started emailing residents, encouraging them to protest the agreement. She had claimed I was trying to extort them, and she even floated a bizarre idea, building a new road that bypassed my land entirely, cutting through the backwoods and into county land. It was desperate, it was foolish, and worst of all, it stirred up more division. I started getting strange messages from anonymous numbers. "You'll regret this. We don't need your land. You're ruining a community." And one afternoon, I found tire tracks through the edge of my woods, like someone had tried to scout out a path behind the neighborhood. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. That part of the land had no roads, steep slopes, and hidden drop-offs. They were playing with fire dots, so I responded the only way I could, legally and publicly. I filed a notice with the county, making it clear that any construction or activity on my land without written permission would result in a lawsuit and a cease and desist. I posted new signs along the back trail, and I sent an email to every Lakewood Heights homeowner attaching the survey, the legal notice, and a simple message. "You are not being forced. You are being offered a chance. Don't let one person's pride cost you your peace." The next HOA meeting was packed. Residents filled every seat this time. I didn't attend, but I didn't need to. Jerry gave me the rundown afterward. "Susan tried to stir the pot," he said, "but people shut her down hard. No one wants to fight you anymore. They just want this over." The lease was approved. 92% voted yes. It was done. The community would pay a fair annual fee for access to the land, and in return, I'd maintain the roads and trails and leave the gates open. The steel barrier came down the next morning. The HOA security uniforms vanished. Peace returned, but with a new understanding. The residents weren't trapped anymore, but they now knew who held the key, and it wasn't someone in a boardroom. It was the guy who walked the woods, fixed his own fences, and drank coffee by the lake, quietly owning everything they thought they controlled. Summer came early that year. The pine trees around the lake grew fuller, and the sun stayed up longer, casting golden light over Pine Hollow. With the HOA lease now signed and the gate removed, everything began to feel normal again, at least on the surface. But in truth, nothing would ever be quite the same. The people of Lakewood Heights had learned something important, not just about land ownership or property lines, but about humility, boundaries, and the value of knowing the full story before choosing a fight. After the agreement was finalized, a strange thing started to happen. Residents who once avoided eye contact now waved when I passed. Some even stopped by the campground just to say thank you. Dana, the new HOA president, remained respectful and professional. She even invited me to speak at their next community barbecue, which I politely declined. I wasn't looking to be a local hero, I just wanted peace. And now, I had it. The campground grew busier that season. With the new agreement, I had the funds to upgrade a few cabins and improve the hiking paths. Families returned, laughter echoed through the woods again, and the lake sparkled with life. People camped, fished, roasted marshmallows by the fire, and felt safe knowing they wouldn't be turned away by a gate or a guard with a clipboard. One afternoon, Jerry came by again carrying a fresh jar of homemade peach jam. "We're not all like Susan," he said, handing it to me with a smile. "Some of us are just folks who want to live quietly." "I know," I said, taking the jar, "and I never blamed all of you." We sat for a while under the shade of the old oak tree by the water. He told me the inside scoop, how the new board had implemented rules requiring community-wide votes on anything that touched shared property. No more closed-door decisions. No more power plays. Real transparency. And that was enough for me. But not everyone was so quick to forget. Susan, despite being voted out and publicly scolded by her neighbors, didn't disappear completely. She moved to towns over but occasionally wrote blog posts painting herself as the victim, the woman who stood up against land bullying and refused to be intimidated by male property owners. Most people rolled their eyes and ignored her. Some chuckled. I didn't say a word. In my mind, that chapter was closed, because here's the thing. I hadn't won by shouting louder or pushing harder. I had simply done what was right. I stayed calm. I got the facts, I defended what was mine, and that, in the end, was stronger than pride or politics. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail from a family in Lakewood Heights. It was handwritten, neat cursive. Inside was a photo of their daughter playing by the lake with her dog, and a short message. "Thank you for not giving up on the land. We didn't understand how much we were taking for granted. You taught us a lesson we won't forget." I pinned it to the board inside the main cabin. That was the kind of note that meant more than all the legal victories combined, because it proved something I'd suspected all along. Deep down, most people just want to do the right thing. They just need someone brave enough to show them where the line is, and I was that someone. That fall, I added a new sign at the trailhead that led from Lakewood Heights to the shared hiking path. It read, "Welcome, walk softly. This land has a story." Visitors smiled when they passed it. Kids asked their parents what it meant. Some parents didn't know how to explain it, others did. And in time, the story passed from neighbor to neighbor, not as a bitter feud, but as a quiet reminder of how fast control can become blindness, and how one mistake can turn into a lesson for many. The campground thrived, the trails remained open, and the partnership between Pine Hollow and Lakewood Heights, while built on rocky beginnings, held steady. Each year, they renewed the lease without fuss. Dana continued as board president, and we kept communication clear and respectful. There were no more surprise gates. No more angry letters. Just the sound of water brushing the shore and kids laughing from across the trees. Sometimes, I'd sit by the fire pit at night, coffee in hand, and think about how close everything came to disaster. How easily it could have ended in lawsuits, press coverage, and community division. But instead, it ended with understanding, hard-earned, yes, but real. One evening, as the sky turned purple and gold, a teenage boy from Lakewood Heights wandered into my camp store. He was maybe 16, polite but clearly curious. "Are you the guy who owns all this?" he asked, gesturing toward the lake. "Yep," I said, smiling. "That's me." He looked around. "It's cool. I heard the story. My dad says you could have shut the whole place down if you wanted to." I nodded. "I could have. Why didn't you?" I looked out the window toward the glowing water and thought for a moment. Then I said, "Because peace is worth more than revenge. And sometimes, teaching people a lesson doesn't mean hurting them. It means showing them the truth and letting them choose who they want to be." He nodded slowly, like he was still chewing on that. "Cool," he said. "Well, thanks for not being a jerk." I laughed. "Anytime, kid." He left with a soda and a bag of chips, and I was left with a grin and a quiet heart. The war was over. The land was mine, and the peace, that was mine, too. Because sometimes, being the landlord of the land makes you something more, the keeper of calm, the guardian of respect, and the quiet reminder that no gate, no title, and no board can stand stronger than the truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Bright Reality for more powerful real-life stories that keep you hooked.